And welcome students as we continue our review of topics from Programming 2. Today let's do a quick refresher on that of exception handling. So first thing, if you recall, were the try-catch statements. So these are the basic structure used with exception handling. All right, you have a try block and then a catch block of code. The try block, of course, contains the code that may throw the exception. Whereas in comparison, the catch block is what actually handles the exception. So for example, if you have an input mismatch exception, that might get executed in the try block, but it's going to catch it then in the catch block, and they'll handle whatever code you want to do, or it's just give a statement, exit the system, whatever. Now the general exception is structured kind of as follows. You have try with some code in between, and then catch, like exception E or whatever the name of the exception is, and the stuff inside of that. Now there are specific exceptions. Our exception E is what we use there is kind of a general exception, but you can code specific exceptions for specific errors. So for example, if you're using the scanner class and are expecting an int, but the user types a letter, it would throw an input mismatch exception. Now, obviously, we can catch this with catch input mismatch exception E, and then whatever code we want to handle it. Any code can be placed inside of those curly brackets with the dot, dot, dot. I haven't said it. So with those ellipses, place the ellipsis with your code. All right, do that in your catch statement. Although typically, a lot of times what we'll see you do, even though yes, you can have it like technically rerun the program or whatever like that, a lot of times what you'll see this do is it'll give like some kind of message, whether it's like a debug message or something like that. And then you might even have something like a system.exit where it just shuts the program down because you want to terminate it. Now, when we actually want to work on throwing exceptions, we can do that inside of our try block by using the throw command. So, for example, the throw statement, throw new exception, input must be positive, would be caught by the appropriate catch block. Catch exception E would act then as a general string message constructor. If we look at other exception classes, some of the other common exceptions that we may catch with our catch blocks may include things such as IO exceptions, which are used to handle general input-output errors. No such method exceptions. These are generally used to handle methods that don't exist but may be called. It'll say, no such method, because you may say, try to code something in your program. This one's a little bit harder to see because a lot of times your compiler will catch those at runtime. File not found exception used to handle errors related to file processing. Now remember, you can have more than one exception in your code, but the catch exception E is kind of like a general exception and should be included in all of your catches. Now, no, it's not required that you use this here. All right, so if you don't put catch exception E, you're not going to get penalized in any shape, way, or form. The compiler is not going to yell at you. In fact, if you don't want to put it in there because you just want to make your code smaller, you can do that. But it does act kind of as a nice catch-all should your program encounter like a fatal error, because you can then just exception E, system.out.println, fatal error. You don't know what it does, but it apparently caused something for your program to terminate. Now, we can also have user-defined exception classes. So besides the ones that are built and baked into the Java library, we can, of course, write our own. You can create those exception classes to be used by your program. So, for example, a division by zero exception. So if your program, let's say it was a calculator, and you didn't want it to crash every time someone was going to be a smart aleck and said, hey, I'm going to divide by zero and break the computer. Nope, your program says that's a divide by zero exception, and now we're going to handle that. These classes, of course, should extend the base class exception and are similar to any other exception in how they're called. All right, now remember when I say extend, that means in the class name. So like if we had our divide by zero exception, it would be divide by zero extends exception. Now we can, of course, put exceptions right into the methods themselves. You can throw user-created exceptions within the methods. So to do so, be sure to add the appropriate throws method to the method header. So for example, public static double safe divide in top and bottom throws division by zero exception. You can add multiple exceptions to a method this way. You just have to, code them in properly. Just remember that if a method throws an exception that isn't caught within the method's invocation will end immediately. So, for example, let's say you do throw the method, all right, and that method isn't really caught, or the throw isn't really caught, I should say. It just terminates your method. It's going to exit out the method because it doesn't have any way of really following up with this. So that's one reason why we might want to use a throws. All right, and finally, we have finally. You know how many times I've waited to use that? Finally, we have finally. Let's go. If you have some code that you want executed after a try-catch block, you can use finally to run code regardless of whether an exception was thrown or caught. The try block runs to the end and no exception is thrown. In this case, the finally block is executed after the try block. Or an exception is thrown in the try block and is caught when the catch block is positioned after the try block. In this case, the finally block is executed after the catch block is executed. Or an exception is thrown in the try block and there's no matching catch block in the method to catch the exception. In this case, the method invocation ends and the exception object is thrown to the enclosing method. However, the finally block is executed before the method ends. So pretty much the order way this you can think about it is with the finally, the first scenario is it runs your try block, doesn't encounter any errors, goes to the finally. The second scenario is it tries the try block, hits an exception, so goes to your catch block, and then goes to the finally code. So it's hitting all three. Or the last one is it fails the try block, tries to hit a catch, but there's no catch that can contain it. So it's going to error out, but it's still going to run that finally before the program terminates. All right, and that's going to wrap it up. It's a kind of a quick recap. I'll put some example programs up into the notes for you. Of course, remember, you can always go back and look at your notes from programming too, but I'll put a couple of them up there just for your reference, just so you have access to them. And I will see you for next time.